So if you're a movie snob just like yours truly, you might be well aware that 2024 hasn't really gotten off to the best start. These first couple of months have been pretty rocky, to say the very least. We haven't really had that one great movie to really kick us into another gear this calendar year. Because at this point, I feel like we just need something epic. We need something cool. We need something awesome. Enter Dune Part 2. Just like the first movie, which came out 3 years ago, this one was also directed by Denis Villenueve, starring Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Josh Brolin, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Butler, a gigantic ensemble cast. And I got to see this earlier this morning on a humongous IMAX screen in a packed theater for a matinee. So let's talk about it. This is a direct follow-up, obviously, to the first film, as Paul Atreides unites with Chani and the Fremen, all while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. He must prevent a terrible future only he can foresee, while he's facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the universe. Now, those of you who've been with me for a while, I really enjoyed the first Dune film. I even said a few years back when this thing came out, this honestly has potential to be this new generation's Lord of the Rings franchise. And yes, this first Dune movie does not feel like a complete adventure just yet, because you needed the follow-up. And I feel like that first Dune movie will get better upon repeated marathon viewings, because when you look at Dune Part 2 and the ramifications of what it's going to do for science fiction entertainment, like, I'm sure this movie's gonna be studied, like, for years and years and years to come. Denis Villeneuve just has that touch where he just inspires the young filmmakers out there. Because technically speaking, when you look at Dune Part 2 and when you watch this on the big screen, this is filmmaking perfection. Not only was this movie consistently entertaining for 2 hours and 45 minutes with maximum tension, and not only was it incredibly exciting with some gigantic action set pieces and beautiful CGI, but as a movie snob, like I've mentioned before, I absolutely adore when I can leave a movie theater with a renewed sense of discovery. And what I mean by that is you leave the theater and you're legitimately just sitting there wondering as you're driving home, how in the did they do that? How did they pull off all those shots that they were able to get? How did they make this movie look as beautiful as it does? And that's just a testament to Denis Villeneuve as a director. Like, we are watching a master at work. If you've seen any of his previous credits, like Prisoners, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, the first Dune film, you know that this guy knows what he's doing. And it's like, you can't really picture these movies being directed by anybody else. Because of the cinematography required to tell a story like this, because of the scope needed for an atmosphere this gigantic. He is absolutely the right guy for this job. This cinematography is some of the most beautiful that these eyes have ever seen. This is the same cinematographer from the first Dune movie reprising his role for Part 2. This is also the same DP of The Batman, which is one of the best looking comic book movies I've ever seen. And it feels all the more huge because of Hans Zimmer's involvement as composer. It just, God, Hans Zimmer, like, one of the greatest composers living right now, but like, this is one of his best scores. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying that, because the dude's already a legend. But there's not a lot of his scores out there that can legitimately send shivers up and down my spine anymore. Hans Zimmer, it's good to have you back, man. I could gush about the technicals for a whole other hour. How are the performances here? There is not one weak link throughout this entire ensemble cast. Timothée Chalamet continues to prove himself as one of the best young actors out there right now. Paul Atreides has a very interesting arc, and he gets to explore lots of emotional range on both sides of the coin of good and evil. Not to give too much away, of course, but let's just say that Chalamet is up for the task. And this really is an actor I feel like that can do it all. He can do the Oscar favorite heavy drama like Call Me By Your Name. He can do the family-friendly fluff like Wonka. Which, yeah, I'll die on this hill. Wonka was one of my favorite movies from last year. None of you can change my mind. Wonka was freaking awesome. Dune Part 2 was awesome in a different sense, of course. Timothée Chalamet, I feel like, is a big reason why people will relate to the story. Because it honestly just feels like watching this hero. It feels like I'm watching Daniel Radcliffe in Harry Potter all over again. You know, because it feels like you definitely have a similar arc to a Harry Potter with a forbidden prophecy. He feels like he's the chosen one. And yeah, even though the material feels derivative, It's the way it's presented that makes it feel so refreshing. One of my other big problems with the first Dune movie is the lack of Zendaya. Let's just say that they definitely remedy that in this sequel. She gets so much more to do. And her character is so freaking interesting in her own right. She is not just a romantic lead for Timothée Chalamet to play off of. This is a very, very strong female character. And you definitely understand why she feels the way she does about certain things, and you definitely feel sympathy for her. And that's what's so amazing about Dune Part 2, is they set up a lot of these characters and they just make you want to see more out of them. Like, each character's journey in this movie feels like a complete arc, but then by the end, it's like you want to pop in Part 3 right now, which, if rumors are to be believed, yeah, we're getting Part 3. I mean, everybody's great in this movie. Florence Pugh, as she always is freaking fantastic. Rebecca Ferguson gets a lot of really interesting stuff to do in this movie. Josh Brolin, I haven't said that name in a while. He's so freaking great in this movie, as he usually is. Javier Bardem? Man, did he shock me in this. He was so freaking funny. Imagine that. Anton from No Country for Old Men is your comic relief. Talk about somebody who can do it all. Like, dude, this cast is so loaded. Stellan Skarsgård is absolutely disgusting as a villain in this. Seydoux gets some interesting stuff to do. Bautista has such an interesting arc in this movie. There wasn't nearly enough of him. I wanted more out of him. But yeah, you know what? I think the big show stealer is the same show stealer for a lot of my other colleagues on here. Austin freaking Butler, man. What a great villain. Austin Butler is pretty much unrecognizable in this movie. There is not one other role that he's done throughout his career where he transforms himself more than he does here. And yes, that includes Elvis. Like, the first time I laid my eyes on this guy, it took me a second to register that this was Austin Butler. His head is shaved bald, he's completely pale, his voice is completely raspy, and whenever he smiles, you can see that his teeth are kind of blackened for half of this. But the big kicker for me was I look into his eyes, the windows of the soul, if you will, and I'm like, okay, yeah, there he is. There's Austin Butler. I'm just sitting here singing the guy's praises because he was so freaking foreboding and intimidating. I loved it. Every single character is so freaking interesting to watch. Everybody has their own compelling arc. Now, I did overhear some people leaving this screening I was at this morning saying that there were too many characters and too many plot lines, and it kind of made it a bit confusing for them, and some kind of checked out when the villains were introduced. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to change your opinion. If you think there's too many characters, I think that's a completely fair analysis. But let me ask you guys this. How is that any different from watching a TV show with a gazillion characters? Like, let's pretend that these Dune movies are actually TV shows for a second. If you had popped in Dune Part 2 and you started binge watching this season, and you have one episode, maybe even two, dedicated to the introduction of Austin Butler's character, I really don't think the people leaving this theater today that I overheard talking about this, I don't think they would have been complaining. So answer me this, how is that any different from when you watch a TV show like Game of Thrones? You have a dedicated episode to Jaime or something like that. But then if Game of Thrones were a movie, and you have Jaime just taking over like a complete half hour of your time, and then you just backtrack away from the Stark house and you just want to go back to the Starks. Like, honestly, my point is, if you checked out of Dune Part 2 because you found that there were too many plot holes and it was too confusing, that's fine. But I counter this by asking, by that same logic, would you feel any different if you were watching a TV show with too many characters? And I will admit, the pacing of this movie I found masterful for the most part. Because like I said, this movie is very long, 2 hours and 45 minutes, and I was consistently entertained from start to finish. If you were to tell me that this third act and this ending felt a little bit rushed, again, I'm not going to sit here and argue that too much, but I almost found this third act very akin to The Last Jedi. Now, hear me out on this. Hear me out, because I can already sense that some people down in the comments are going to be like, The Last Jedi sucked. Why are you comparing Denis Villeneuve's magnum opus to The Last Jedi? And look, I get it. I totally get where you're coming from. But that whole showdown between Kylo Ren and Rey with Snoke in the background kind of felt a bit rushed too, didn't it? I don't want to give too much away, but Dune Part 2's final conclusion and its finale and its final boss fight, if you will, it definitely was kind of giving off Last Jedi syndrome in a sense. But here's the real kicker. I don't think that's a knock against Dune Part 2. Because yes, even though this finale does feel very uneven in terms of pace compared to the slow pace that you had preceding it, The Last Jedi kind of did that too. And then when you get to that finale, it is still consistently entertaining, and you're just on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next. And in contrast to the original Dune movie, Dune Part 2 feels like a complete story. But then again, once this movie wraps up and once the credits started rolling, I wanted Dune Part 3 to kickstart right then and there. And let me tell you, once Dune Part 3's release date is announced, you bet your ass I'm there day one. Denis Villeneuve is continuing to prove himself to be a master and the only director that could have helmed something as gigantic as this. I loved Dune Part 2. I can't wait to watch it again. If you guys are into movies and you guys love going to the movie theater and experiencing the biggest screen possible, I'm telling you, spend your money on Dune Part 2. You're not going to regret it. I'm going to give Dune Part 2 an A+. Now we're talking. This is what this year needed, was a fucking awesome movie like this. Like, seriously, I cannot wait to go and watch this movie again. If you guys have seen Dune Part 2, let me know down in the comments and let me know what you thought of it. Do you guys prefer this movie over the first one? Because, in case you haven't guessed, I sure as hell do. But I love discussing all new things in movies and entertainment over here on The Regular. If you guys have stumbled upon this channel for the first time, welcome. Do consider subscribing today and tap on that thumbs up as well. This is an awesome community of geeks, film lovers, and entertainment lovers alike, and y'all are invited to join us. Guys, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I feel like from this point on in 2024, we're just going to get spoiled with hit after hit after hit. I think the quality is only going to start to rise from this point. Dune Part 2 is exactly what this year needed. This is going to set the tone for the rest of this calendar year. But with that in mind, guys, thank you so much again for tuning in and supporting this channel. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.